The silence in a courtroom is a special kind of heavy. It's not empty. It's filled with the weight of judgment of lives about to be irrevocably changed. For Eleanor Vance, that silence was a suffocating shroud. She sat on a cold, polished bench, staring at the back of her late husband's brother Michael, whose smug confidence radiated from him in waves. She believed she was moments away from being publicly humiliated, cast aside by the man she had loved for 25 years. Every secret meeting he'd had, every hushed phone call in the months before he died, had pointed to one devastating conclusion: Richard had changed his will. And she was about to be left with nothing but memories and a broken heart. She was wrong about everything. Eleanor and Richard Vance had a life that looked like a perfectly curated photograph from a high-end lifestyle magazine. Their home, a sprawling modern masterpiece in the hills of Calabasas, California, was a testament to Richard's genius as a world-renowned architect. It featured clean lines, vast plains of glass, and an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the cerulean sky. For 25 years, their marriage had been built on a foundation as solid as the concrete and steel Richard used in his iconic buildings. They were a team. He was the visionary, and she was the anchor, the one who had gracefully stepped away from her own budding career as an art historian, to manage their lives, host the dazzling parties, and create a sanctuary for him to return to after his globe-trotting projects. Their love story was the envy of their social circle. They still held hands, shared private jokes across crowded rooms, and started every morning with coffee on the terrace, watching the sunrise paint the valley in hues of rose and gold. It was a perfect life. Until it wasn't. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in April. It wasn't a dramatic shattering, but a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye. Richard came home from a series of medical tests, his face the color of ash. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The words hung in the pristine, sun-drenched kitchen like a toxic fog. 6 months, the doctors said. A year if he responded well to the aggressive treatment. In that moment, Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. Her own ambitions, her art, their future travel plans. Everything dissolved into a singular, terrifying focus: saving Richard. She became his caregiver, his advocate, his unwavering pillar of support. She scheduled appointments, researched alternative therapies, and pureed vegetables into nutrient-rich soups he could barely stomach. But as the disease began its cruel work on his body, a different kind of sickness began to infect their marriage. Richard, once an open book to her, started to become withdrawn. He began taking phone calls in his study, with the door closed, something he had never done before. When she would enter, he'd click his laptop shut with a nervous speed that made her stomach clench. "Just business, honey," he'd say, his voice strained. "Tying up loose ends at the firm, making sure everything is handed over smoothly." Eleanor tried to believe him. It made sense. A man like Richard Vance, whose name was on buildings from Dubai to Tokyo, would have a complex empire to organize. But the secrecy felt different. It was personal. One evening, while bringing him a cup of herbal tea, she overheard him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "The acquisition has to be discreet, Isabella. No paper trail back to the main accounts. Use the private fund. Yes, I know the price is high, but she's worth it. She's worth everything. Isabella." The name was like a shard of glass in her heart. Eleanor stood frozen outside the door, the tea tray trembling in her hands. Who was Isabella? He had never mentioned an Isabella. The phrase "she's worth it" played on a loop in her mind, each repetition twisting the knife deeper. She backed away silently, her mind racing. Was this a colleague, a broker, or was it something else? A week later, while tidying his desk, she found a receipt from a high-end jewelry store. Gelson's of Beverly Hills, a custom-designed sapphire necklace. The cost was astronomical. It wasn't for her. Her birthday and their anniversary had long passed. The receipt was tucked inside a brochure for a private gallery showing, and on the brochure a name was circled in Richard's familiar scrawl, Isabella Rossi, curator. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture of betrayal so ugly it made her physically ill. The late-night calls, the closed-door meetings, the expensive gifts. Richard wasn't just tying up loose ends. He was building a new life, a future with someone else. A younger woman, no doubt. A beautiful art curator named Isabella. He was spending their money, their shared fortune, on this other woman, while she, Eleanor, spent her days measuring out his medication and holding his hand through nauseating chemotherapy sessions. The secure foundation of their 25-year marriage had fractured, and through the cracks, Eleanor could see a terrifying abyss opening up beneath her. The man she was dedicating her every waking moment to was betraying her in the most profound way imaginable, and she was utterly alone with the terrible secret. Doubt, once planted, grows with the tenacity of a weed, its roots strangling everything beautiful around it. Eleanor's doubt was nurtured by a constant stream of unsettling discoveries. She started to look for things, a conscious and self-destructive act of picking at a wound. She checked their bank statements online, something she hadn't done in years. She found multiple, large withdrawals from a private account she barely knew existed the same one Richard had mentioned on the phone. The transfers were labeled simply as acquisitions. She confided in her best friend, Sarah Jenkins, over a tense lunch at a quiet cafe. Sarah, a fiercely protective divorcee, listened with a frown, her fork stilled over her quinoa salad. Eleanor. "I love you, but you need to wake up and smell the betrayal," Sarah said, her voice sharp but laced with concern. "Men do this, especially powerful men when they're facing their own mortality. They want to feel Alib desired. They look for a last hurrah." But Richard. Eleanor whispered the name, catching in her throat. "After everything we've been through. While I'm holding him, cleaning up after him, watching him fade away. It's the classic playbook." Sarah insisted, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "He's ensuring his new friend is taken care of. You need to protect yourself, Ellie. You need to see a lawyer. Now. Before he drains everything." Eleanor resisted the idea, feeling like a betrayal in itself. But Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Protect yourself. The thought was alien. For 25 years, her identity was intertwined with Richard's. There was no her to protect, only us. But now us felt like a lie. Her descent into suspicion became an obsession. She hired a private investigator, a man named Frank Miller, whose cheap suit and world-weary eyes made her feel ashamed. The fee was exorbitant, but she paid it from her personal savings, the art fund she had maintained since before her marriage. The investigator's first report landed in her email inbox a week later. It was a single photograph that knocked the air from her lungs. It was Richard, looking gaunt, but dressed impeccably in a beige suit, sitting at an outdoor table at a chic cafe in Malibu. Across from him sat a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with long dark hair, olive skin, and a vibrant smile. She was laughing, her head tilted back, and Richard was looking at her with an expression Eleanor hadn't seen on his face in months. It was a look of pure, unadulterated delight. The caption below the photo read, "Richard Vance with Isabella Rossi, 15 p.m. The Coastal Grill." Eleanor slammed her laptop shut. The visual proof was a gut punch. This wasn't a business meeting. This was intimate. This was the woman he was buying sapphires for. This was the woman who was stealing the last precious months of her husband's life. That night, she decided to confront him. She found him in his study, staring out the large window at the city lights twinkling below. He looked so fragile, his frame swallowed by his favorite cashmere robe. For a moment, her resolve wavered. But then she pictured him laughing with Isabella. "Richard, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She held up a printout of the photograph. "Who is she?" Richard turned his eyes, tired but clear. He glanced at the photo, and his expression didn't change. There was no guilt, no surprise, just a deep, weary sadness. "Eleanor, please, don't do this. Don't do this," she cried, her voice rising. "I'm taking care of you, Richard. I'm watching you die. And you're out having cozy lunches and buying jewelry for some woman named Isabella. Who is she? Are you in love with her?" "It's not what you think," he said, softly, taking a step towards her. "Then what is it?" she demanded, backing away. "I found the bank statements, the private fund, the money you're spending. Are you changing your will? Are you leaving everything to her?" The question hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Richard's face, already pale, seemed to lose all its remaining color. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not just sadness in his eyes, but a flicker of what looked like hurt. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy, "after all our years together, can't you just trust me? Please. I need you to trust me on this." But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. His plea, meant to be reassuring, sounded like the most profound of dismissals. He wasn't denying it. He was asking for a blank check of faith while he systematically dismantled their life. "Trust you," she repeated the word, tasting like acid. "I don't even know who you are anymore." She turned and fled the room, leaving him standing alone in the dark. The conversation was a confirmation of her worst fears. He hadn't denied changing the will. He hadn't explained Isabella. He had simply asked for trust, a shield to hide behind, while he sharpened the blade. From that day on, Eleanor continued her duties as a caregiver, but her heart was encased in ice. She was no longer a loving wife. She was a warden, counting down the days to her own financial and emotional execution. The months that followed were a surreal and agonizing blend of intimate care and profound emotional distance. On the surface, Eleanor was the picture of devotion. She learned to administer his injections, manage the complex cocktail of painkillers that kept him comfortable, and read to him for hours from his favorite books on architectural history. She held the basin for him when the chemotherapy made him sick and gently bathed him when he was too weak to stand. She performed these acts with a numb, methodical efficiency, her hands moving with a tenderness that her heart no longer felt. Inside, she was a roiling sea of resentment and fear. Every touch felt like a lie. Every kind word he spoke to her felt like a calculated deception. He was dying, and she was mourning, not just the impending loss of his life, but the death of the man she thought she had married. Richard's younger brother, Michael Vance, became a frequent visitor. Michael was Richard's opposite in every way. Where Richard was reserved, brilliant, and elegant, Michael was loud, perpetually aggrieved, and carried the air of a man who believed the world owed him something. He ran a small, perpetually struggling real estate firm, and had always lived in his older brother's long shadow, a fact that had curdled into a permanent layer of envy. Michael would arrive with cheap flowers and an expensive bottle of wine, which he would mostly drink himself, and settle in for long, rambling monologues about his business deals. He treated Eleanor with a cloying, condescending pity that set her teeth on edge. "You're a saint, Eleanor, a real saint," he'd say, patting her hand while his eyes scanned the expensive art on the walls. "Don't know how you do it. My brother, he can be a complicated man, very private, always has been." He seemed to sense the schism between Eleanor and Richard, and like a predator sensing a weakness, he began to exploit it. During one visit, he found Eleanor alone in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window. Heard him on the phone with his lawyer again. Michael said, his tone conspiratorial as he topped up his wine glass. Something about updating his final wishes, making some significant adjustments. He told me he wanted to make sure everything was put right before the end. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Significant adjustments. Put right. The words confirmed her deepest fears. Richard was cutting her out, and he was telling his brother about it. He said that she asked her voice barely a whisper. Clear as day, Michael confirmed, taking a deep gulp of wine. Told me that people's priorities change at the end. That he had to honor a new commitment. "I'm just looking out for you, Ellie. You've given him the best years of your life. Don't let him throw you away like an old shoe." Michael's words, intended to sound like concern, were nothing more than gasoline on the fire of her paranoia. He was positioning himself, she realized. If she was out of the picture, he, as Richard's only sibling, would be the likely heir. He was subtly aligning himself with her, pretending to be her ally, while waiting to pick over the bones of her marriage. The house, once a sanctuary of love and light, became a silent battlefield. Eleanor and Richard moved around each other like ghosts. The shared jokes and easy intimacy were gone, replaced by a tense, polite formality. He would often watch her with a pained expression, as if he wanted to say something, but the wall between them was now too high, too thick. He tried once more a few weeks before the end. "Ellie." He rasped his hand, now skeletal, reaching for hers. "The things I've been doing, the arrangements, it's all for you. It's always been for you." She pulled her hand away, the gesture sharp and involuntary. "Please, Richard, don't lie to me. Not now." The hurt that flashed in his eyes was so profound that it almost broke through her armor, but she held firm. She had seen the photograph. She had heard the phone calls. She had Michael's confirmation. To believe Richard now would be to make a fool of herself. His words were just the final cruel twist of the knife, an attempt to paint himself as a saint before he left her destitute. The last week of Richard's life was a blur of hospice nurses, hushed conversations, and the ever-present hum of the oxygen machine. Eleanor sat by his bedside, holding his hand out of a sense of duty, her mind a million miles away, calculating her next steps. She imagined the humiliation, the legal battles, the pitying looks from their friends. She envisioned herself having to sell the house, her home, and move into a small, lonely apartment, her future erased by a woman named Isabella Rossi. When Richard Vance took his final, shuddering breath on a cool September morning, Eleanor felt a strange and terrible mix of emotions. There was grief deep and primal for the man she had once loved, but underneath it, cold and hard as a river stone, was a grim sense of resolve. The war of attrition was over. The battle for her future was about to begin. The funeral was a grand, somber affair, befitting a man of Richard Vance's stature. The modernist chapel he had once designed himself was filled with titans of industry, celebrated artists, and society figures, as all murmuring condolences to the grieving widow. Eleanor moved through the proceedings in a haze, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, a veil shielding her face. She accepted hugs and expressions of sympathy, with a detached grace playing the part of the heartbroken wife, while her mind was consumed with a cold dread. Michael was by her side throughout, a self-appointed master of ceremonies. He greeted guests with a somber handshake, his face a mask of sorrow that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was already acting as if he were the new patriarch of the Vance family. A terrible loss, he'd say to a guest, his arm draped possessively around Eleanor's shoulder. But Richard was prepared. He got his affairs in order. He made his final wishes crystal clear. Each time he said it, it was a small public jab at her, a reminder of the impending doom. The week after the funeral, the vultures truly began to circle. The first to call was Richard's lawyer, a stern, old-world gentleman named Arthur Abernathy. He informed Eleanor that the reading of the will would take place in 2 weeks at the probate court, a formality required due to the size of the estate, and he hinted potential for dispute. Potential for dispute? Eleanor asked, her heart sinking. It is always wise to be prepared for any eventuality, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Abernathy said in his non-committal tone. He refused to elaborate, citing his duty to his late client. The next call was from Michael. Just got off the phone with Abernathy, he said, his voice brimming with false camaraderie. So it's official. Look, Ellie, I want you to know whatever happens, I'm here for you. Richard told me he made changes to provide for the family. That's me. But I'll make sure you're not left out in the cold. You can stay in the house for a few months, get yourself sorted. The sheer audacity of his offer was breathtaking. He was already carving up her life magnanimously, offering her a few months' stay in her own home. The implication was clear: he expected to inherit the bulk of the estate, including the house. Eleanor spent the next 2 weeks in a state of suspended animation. The cavernous house echoed with a silence that was far more oppressive than the sounds of Richard's illness. She wandered from room to room, touching the objects they had collected over a lifetime. A sculpture from Japan, a painting from a then-unknown artist in Paris, a hand-carved wooden bowl from Africa. Each object was a memory, and each memory was now tainted with the bitter taste of betrayal. These weren't their treasures anymore. They were assets to be liquidated, part of an estate she would have no claim to. Sarah urged her to hire a litigator to prepare to contest the will. You have rights as his wife of 25 years, Ellie spousal rights. You can't let him do this to you from beyond the grave. But Eleanor felt paralyzed. Contesting the will would mean airing their dirty laundry in public. It would mean fighting against a ghost, and she felt she had already lost. Her energy was gone, drained by months of caregiving and emotional turmoil. All she could muster was a bleak, fatalistic resolve to see it through, to face the humiliation head-on, and then somehow figure out how to rebuild her life from the ashes. The night before the reading, she couldn't sleep. She found herself in Richard's study, the room she had avoided since his death. It still smelled faintly of him, of his cologne, of old books and paper. On his desk, perfectly aligned, was a single sealed envelope made of thick cream-colored paper. Her name, Eleanor, was written on the front, in his distinctive architectural handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Was this it? A final letter of explanation, an apology, a confession. She held it in her hands, the paper cool against her skin. She wanted to tear it open to know the truth, but she couldn't. She was afraid that the words inside would be the final, definitive confirmation of her failure of his betrayal. She decided to wait. She would bring it with her to the courthouse. She would face the legal verdict first, and then, only then, would she read his final words to her. She placed the letter in her handbag, a final piece of evidence in the trial of her own marriage. The probate courtroom was a cold, impersonal space designed to strip emotion from the proceedings of life and death. The walls were a sterile beige, the air was stale, and the fluorescent lights hummed with an irritating monotony. Eleanor sat at a long, polished table next to her lawyer, a quiet man Sarah had insisted she hire at the last minute. Across from them sat Michael, flanked by his own aggressive-looking attorney. Michael gave her a small, pitying nod, the look of a victor offering condolences to the vanquished. Eleanor clutched her handbag in her lap, the crisp edges of Richard's letter, a constant, terrifying presence against her fingers. She felt small and exposed under the dispassionate gaze of the judge. An older woman named Judge Miller, whose face was etched with the weary patience of someone who had witnessed every form of human greed and sorrow. Mr. Abernathy Richards' lawyer stood before the judge, his back ramrod straight. He cleared his throat, and the rustling in the courtroom ceased. "We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Allen Vance, executed on August 10th of this year." Mr. Abernathy began, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Eleanor's breath hitched. August 10th. That was just a month before he died. Deep in the throes of his secret life with Isabella. This was it. The new will. The one that would erase her. Mr. Abernathy began to read through the preliminary legal language, the formal declarations, the appointment of himself as executor, the clauses covering debts and funeral expenses. It was a drone of legalese that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Eleanor's mind drifted. She saw Richard's face laughing with Isabella at that cafe. She heard his voice on the phone. "She's worth everything." She felt the weight of Michael's smug stare from across the table. Each word from the lawyer was a tick of the clock counting down to her public dispossession. "And so we move to the disposition of assets," Mr. Abernathy announced, drawing her back to the present. The room felt suddenly colder. This was the core of it. He detailed a few minor bequests, a donation of $100,000 to the Architectural Heritage Foundation, a vintage watch to his longtime assistant, a collection of first-edition books to his alma mater. Each one was a small, neat cut, slicing away pieces of the life they had built. Michael leaned forward in his chair, a hungry look in his eyes. His lawyer had a pen poised over a legal pad. Regarding the primary estate, Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice steady, which includes all properties domestic and international, all stock portfolios, liquid assets, art collections, and controlling shares in Vance Architecture International, the total value of which is estimated at $15,800,000. He paused, taking a sip of water. The silence stretched taut and unbearable. Eleanor closed her eyes, bracing herself for the blow. She could feel her own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked drumming in her ears. "Here it comes," she thought. "The end of my life as I know it." Mr. Abernathy put down his glass and looked directly at Eleanor. His expression was for the first time not entirely neutral. There was a flicker of something else there, something she couldn't decipher. He read the next line, the words clear, precise, and utterly world-shattering. "I bequeath the entirety of my estate, without condition or reservation, to my beloved wife, Eleanor Christine Vance. The words from Mr. Abernathy's mouth were a formal, droning litany of legal terminology that barely penetrated the thick fog of Eleanor's dread. Her entire consciousness was coiled into a single tight knot of anticipation in the pit of her stomach. She stared at the polished grain of the table in front of her, tracing the whirls of wood, with her eyes focusing on anything but the impending verbal guillotine. She could feel the physical presence of Michael's smugness from across the room. It was an oily, suffocating pressure in the air. He was leaning slightly forward, a predator poised to strike his lawyer beside him, looking equally confident. They believed, as she did, that they were mere moments away from a spectacular victory. And so we moved to the disposition of the primary estate. Mr. Abernathy announced, the shift in his tone cutting through her haze. This was it. The air in the room seemed to thin, becoming sharp and difficult to breathe. Eleanor instinctively braced herself, her hands clenching the leather of her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. The letter inside felt like a block of ice against her fingers. Abernathy detailed the minor bequests first, the donation, the watch, the books. Each one felt like the deliberate, theatrical clearing of a stage before the main event. Michael shifted impatiently in his seat. Regarding the primary estate, Abernathy continued, his voice unwavering, as he listed the assets that constituted her entire world. All properties, domestic and international, all stock portfolios, liquid assets, art collections, and controlling shares in Vance Architecture International, the total value of which is estimated at $15,800,000. He paused, a purely professional gesture, to take a sip of water, but it felt like a dramatic device of exquisite cruelty. The silence stretched thin and taut. Eleanor shut her eyes. She pictured Richard's face not as the loving husband she remembered from their youth, but the secretive, distant man of the last 6 months. She saw him laughing with Isabella. She heard Michael's poisonous whispers in her ear. He's throwing you away, like an old shoe. The blow was coming. She was ready. Then Mr. Abernathy placed his glass down with a soft click, looked not at the judge, not at Michael, but directly at her, and read the decisive clause. His words were not shouted, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silent room. I bequeath the entirety of my estate without condition or reservation to my beloved wife, Eleanor Christine Vance. The sentence did not compute. It was as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, her mind scrambling to process a reality so diametrically opposed to the one she had meticulously constructed. My beloved wife, in her entirety. The words echoed in the cavernous space of her disbelief. It wasn't relief that washed over her, but a profound, dizzying and nauseating confusion. It had to be a mistake. Perhaps it was the old will. Perhaps Abernathy had brought the wrong document. A loud, strangled gasp from across the table confirmed she had heard correctly. Michael Vance shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face, moments before a mask of smug satisfaction, was now a grotesque canvas of mottled red and purple disbelief. "No! That is impossible!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. "That's the old will. He changed the will. Read the correct one." His own lawyer, mortified, tugged at his sleeve. "Michael, sit down," he hissed. "He told me." Michael raged, ignoring him and pointing a trembling finger at Abernathy. "He told me he was making adjustments. He said he had new commitments to honor. He was providing for his family. This is a fraud." Judge Miller, who had been observing the proceedings with a stony impassivity, now leaned forward, her gaze like chips of ice. "Mr. Vance, this is your only warning. You will control yourself and sit down, or I will have you removed for contempt of court." The document presented was executed on August 10th of this year. "Is that not correct, Mr. Abernathy?" "It is, Your Honor," Abernathy confirmed calmly. The date just a month before Richard died sent another shockwave through Eleanor. This wasn't the old will. This was the new one. The one he'd made while secretly meeting Isabella. The logic of her world completely fractured. Michael collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut, his face a picture of apoplectic rage and utter humiliation. He was openly sputtering, whispering impossible, impossible to his frantic lawyer. Mr. Abernathy waited for silence to be restored before he spoke again, his voice carrying a new weight of significance. "Your Honor, there is a final codicil. It pertains directly to this situation." Mr. Vance attached a personal letter to the will with the express and legally binding instruction that it be read aloud at this proceeding, if and only if any party formally contested the primary bequest. The room fell into an even deeper silence. Richard had anticipated this. He had known his brother's greed so perfectly that he had set a trap for it, and Michael had just walked straight into it. Judge Miller's eyes narrowed on Michael. "Mr. Vance, your outburst has been noted as a formal contestation. Mr. Abernathy, you are instructed to proceed." Abernathy reached into his briefcase and produced a thick, cream-colored envelope. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. It was identical to the one in her handbag. He unsealed it with a crisp tear and unfolded the single sheet of paper within. He began to read. The words were Richard's, and they filled the cold, sterile courtroom with a warmth and intimacy that was almost unbearable. "My dearest Eleanor," Abernathy read his voice, channeling the gentle gravity of his late client. "If you are hearing this letter, it means two things. First, that I am gone, and second, that someone in this room, likely my dear brother Michael, has let his greed get the better of his grief. I anticipated this, which is why I am writing to you now, to explain the things I could not explain in my final months." Abernathy paused. Eleanor could feel every eye in the room on her, but she saw only the image of Richard at his desk, carefully penning these last words. "I know you were suspicious, my love. I know you were hurting. I saw the doubt in your eyes, and it was a greater pain to me than anything the cancer could do. I know you found out about Isabella, about the money, about the secret meetings. I know what you thought, and I am so sorry for the silence I was forced to keep." A hot wave of shame washed over Eleanor. He had seen it all. He had known. "You gave up your career for me, Eleanor. You put your passion for art history, your brilliant eye on hold to build our life. I never forgot that sacrifice. So when I received my diagnosis, I knew I couldn't leave you with just money. Money is cold. I had to leave you with a purpose, a passion, your passion. Isabella Rossi is not my lover, my darling. She is one of the most respected private art curators in Europe. I hired her months ago. The secret fund, the acquisitions, the trips you thought were for affairs, it was all for a project. Our final project." The world tilted. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as a soft gasp escaped her lips. "Isabella, an art curator. The sapphire necklace you found the receipt for." It wasn't a necklace. It was the sapphire, a small, exquisite, abstract sculpture by the artist Henri Dubois that I knew you admired. The payments to Gelsons were for a rare Monet they had acquired privately, a painting of water lilies I knew you dreamed of seeing every day. Every withdrawal, every secret meeting was me, with Isabella's guidance, buying art. Your kind of art, the kind that makes your eyes light up. The ugly truth she had clung to for months dissolved into dust, revealing a truth so beautiful it was agonizing. Tears began to stream down her face, not of grief, but of a revelation so profound it felt like a physical blow. The project is a private art gallery, a small, beautiful building I designed myself located in downtown Los Angeles. It's finished, and it's stocked with the entire collection we've been acquiring. I kept it a secret because I wanted to hand you the keys to the finished gallery myself. I didn't want you to worry about the cost to be burdened by the logistics while you were caring for me. I wanted it to be a perfect, complete gift, a new beginning built on the foundation of our love. The gallery is called the Eleanor Vance Gallery. It, along with everything else, is yours. It was always, always for you. Please forgive me for the way I had to do it. My only defense is that I loved you too much to do it any other way. With all my love for all time, Richard. When Abernathy's voice stopped, the silence that followed was absolute sacred. It was filled with the immensity of one man's love and one woman's dawning, heart-breaking comprehension. Eleanor sat weeping without sound, her entire body shaking with the force of her regret and the overwhelming beauty of his final act. Across the room, Michael Vance was a statue of ash, his ruin complete and absolute. Judge Miller surveyed the scene, her expression for once stripped of its judicial austerity. She looked at Michael, then at his lawyer, who looked utterly defeated. "Counselor," she said softly to Michael's attorney, "do you wish to withdraw your client's contestation?" The lawyer stood, not even bothering to confer with his client. "Yes, Your Honor. We withdraw the contestation with apologies to the court and to Mrs. Vance." Wise decision. Judge Miller said, her voice regaining its firmness. She looked at Eleanor with a flicker of something that looked almost like kindness. "Probate is granted. The estate of Richard Vance will be transferred to Mrs. Vance in its entirety. This court is adjourned." With the final sharp bang of a gavel, it was over. The legal proceeding had ended, but for Eleanor, the true reckoning had just begun. The sharp, definitive crack of Judge Miller's gavel was not an end, but a violent beginning. It shattered the thick, distorted glass of Eleanor's reality, and the world came rushing in, raw and overwhelming. For a moment, she didn't move. The courtroom began to empty, the sounds of shuffling feet and murmured conversations muffled as if she were under water. Her own lawyer, a kind but ineffectual man named Mr. Peterson, gently touched her arm. "Mrs. Vance, it's over. You're all right." Was she all right? She felt as if she had been flayed open, every nerve ending, exposed to a truth so searing it was almost unbearable. The shame was a physical sensation, a hot, creeping flush that started in her chest and spread through her entire body. She thought of Richard in his final months, his pained, pleading eyes, his gentle attempts to reach her. "Can't you just trust me?" he had asked. And she had answered with coldness, with suspicion, with the vulgarity of a private investigator. She had held his hand as he died, her heart full of resentment for a crime he had never committed. The hypocrisy of it threatened to choke her. Across the room, she saw Michael. He was no longer the smug victor, but a shrunken, pathetic figure. His face was slack with shock, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for his diminished frame. His lawyer was packing a briefcase with brisk, angry movements, avoiding eye contact with his client. As Michael turned to leave, his gaze met Eleanor's for a fleeting second. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a hollow, defeated emptiness. He had gambled on his brother's betrayal and lost everything exposed in a public forum as a man motivated by nothing but avarice. He turned away, a man erased from the narrative, and disappeared through the courtroom doors. It was Mr. Abernathy who approached her. Then his stern demeanor softened by a look of profound sympathy. He had known the truth all along. He had been Richard's confidant, the silent keeper of this grand secret promise. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Richard was very specific in his instructions. He worried this would be difficult for you to understand at first. I had no idea." She whispered the words, feeling pitifully inadequate. He handed her a single, heavy, modern-looking key attached to a simple leather fob, along with a card. "He asked that I give you this. The address is on the card. He said you would know what to do when you saw it." Abernathy paused, his gaze direct. "For what it's worth, in my 35 years of practicing law, I have never drafted a document more filled with love than your husband's final will. The project, it was all he talked about. It gave him strength." The lawyer's words were a small, precious balm on her wounded soul. She clutched the key, its metal cool and solid in her trembling hand. It felt like the only real thing in the world. She thanked him, her voice thick with unshed tears, and walked out of the courthouse, leaving Mr. Peterson to handle the remaining paperwork. The Los Angeles sun was blindingly bright. The city felt alien, the familiar streets and buildings rendered strange and new. She didn't want to go home to the house in Calabasas, a place that now felt like a crime scene, filled with the ghosts of her own terrible assumptions. She got into her car, the engine humming to life, and looked at the address on the card. It was downtown in the Arts District. The drive was a pilgrimage through a landscape of regret. Every red light, every passing billboard triggered a fresh wave of memory, each one recontextualized by the crushing weight of the truth. She remembered a late-night phone call she'd overheard Richard arguing passionately about provenance and condition reports. She had assumed he was discussing a secret asset for Isabella. Now she realized he must have been on the phone with a gallery in London, or a dealer in Tokyo fighting for a piece he knew she would love. She recalled him hunched over his laptop, which she had assumed was for secret emails. He had likely been in a bidding war at a Sotheby's online auction, a warrior fighting for beauty on her behalf. The cruelty of her suspicion was a physical ache. He had been building her a palace, and she had been accusing him of digging her a grave. He was dying, his body failing him, yet he had marshaled his remaining energy not to rage or despair, but to create, to build one last testament, not to his own ego, but to her soul. The address led her to a quiet, tree-lined street she had only vaguely known existed. And there it was. The building was a masterpiece of quiet confidence. It wasn't large or ostentatious, but every line was perfect. The facade was a stunning interplay of white travertine marble and warm, vertically aligned teak wood. A cantilevered roof provided a sliver of shade over a minimalist entrance, and a single floor-to-ceiling pane of glass offered a tantalizing glimpse of a light-filled interior. It was Richard's architectural language evolved and perfected a structure that was both powerful and serene. And above the brushed steel door handle, mounted directly onto the travertine, were the words that made her knees weak. In a clean, elegant font, the letters spelled out her name, the Eleanor Vance Gallery. Her name. Not his. He had made her the landmark. He had made her the legacy. She reached out and touched the cool stone beneath the letters, her fingers tracing her own identity. An identity she felt she no longer deserved. As if sensing her presence, the glass door opened. A young woman with long dark hair and intelligent, compassionate eyes stepped out. She was beautiful just as she had been in the private investigator's photograph, but there was no malice in her face, only a gentle sorrow. It was Isabella Rossi. "Mrs. Vance," Isabella said, her voice soft with a faint Italian accent. "Mr. Abernathy called to let me know you might be coming. Please come in. I am so deeply sorry for your loss." Eleanor looked at the woman she had demonized, the woman she had pictured as a home wrecker, and all she could see was a partner in her husband's love. The venom and hatred she had harbored for months evaporated, leaving behind a hollow ache of shame. "No," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "I am the one who is sorry. For what I thought. For what I suspected. I am so sorry." Isabella gave a small, sad smile. "Richard told me you might feel that way. He regretted the secrecy more than you can know. He said, 'She will hate me for a while, but she will understand in the end. And what I'm building for her is meant to last longer than her anger.'" She gestured inside. "He wanted you to see it. He talked about the moment you would first walk through these doors, nearly every day." Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, leaving her old life on the pavement behind her. The interior was even more beautiful than the outside hinted. It was a single, glorious space, a sanctuary of light. The ceilings soared to double height, and the polished concrete floors reflected the soft ambient glow from a series of expertly hidden skylights. The air smelled of fresh paintwood and possibility. And then she saw the art. It was not just a collection. It was a conversation. It was 25 years of their life together, curated and displayed with breathtaking love. She began to walk slowly as if in a dream. To her right hung a vibrant, chaotic painting by the contemporary Spanish artist Miquel Barceló. She remembered standing before one of his works with Richard in a Madrid museum on their 10th anniversary, telling him how she adored its raw, earthy energy. He had simply squeezed her hand and said, "I see why." Further on a low pedestal, sat a delicate, impossibly intricate bronze sculpture by a Japanese artist she had once written a paper on in graduate school. She had thought the artist was too obscure, that no one remembered her work. Richard had remembered. She saw the small, shimmering Monet of the water lilies, Le Bassin aux Nymphéas, and she was transported back to a rainy Sunday afternoon, 20 years ago, curled up on the sofa, with Richard, an art book, open on her lap. "Can you imagine?" She had sighed, owning a piece of that light. Now she did. Isabella walked with her a respectful distance away, offering quiet context when needed. "Richard acquired this one from a private estate in Geneva," she said, gesturing to a striking black-and-white photograph. "He said you once mentioned this photographer changed the way you looked at shadows." Every piece was a memory. Every painting was a conversation he had listened to. Every sculpture was a dream she had once idly expressed. This wasn't just an art collection bought with a rich man's money. This was an archive of her heart. She finally came to the piece she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. There, in a place of honor, illuminated by a single focused light, was the sapphire. It was not a necklace. It was a stunning abstract sculpture by Henri Dubois, a swirling dynamic form carved from a single piece of lapis lazuli, shot through with veins of pyrite that glittered like distant stars. It was magnificent, capturing the depth and mystery of a midnight sky. She reached out her fingers, hovering just above its cool surface. This beautiful object, this testament to his love, had been the cornerstone of her ugly, jealous fantasies. At the very back of the gallery, overlooking a small, serene garden, with a single Japanese maple tree, was a simple teak bench. Set into the wall above it was a small, unassuming bronze plaque. Eleanor walked toward it, her legs unsteady, and read the simple, devastating inscription. For Eleanor, my anchor, my inspiration, my love. May this place of beauty bring you the joy you have always brought me. R.V. That was it. The directness, the simplicity, the overwhelming love contained in those few words broke through the last of her defenses. She sank onto the bench, and the dam of her tightly controlled grief finally burst. She wept. She wept for the magnificent man she had lost, and for the suspicious, untrusting wife she had become. She cried for the beautiful secret he had carried alone, for the pain he must have felt, watching her turn away from him when he needed her most. They were tears of grief, of shame, of regret, but also of a gratitude so immense, so profound, it felt as big as the sky. It was a cleansing flood, washing away the poison of the past few months and leaving in its place the pure, unvarnished truth of a 25-year love story. She didn't know how long she sat there, Isabella having slipped away to give her privacy. But when the tears finally subsided, the crushing weight in her chest had lifted, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. Richard was gone, but he had left her a map. He had left her a mission. This gallery was not a memorial to a life that was over. It was a blueprint for a life that was just beginning. It was a place for her to work, to create, to share the beauty he had gathered for her. It was his final perfect act of love, a gift not of what he was, but of who she could be. Her purpose, which she thought had vanished with his last breath, was right here, surrounding her, waiting for her to claim it. Eleanor's story is a powerful, heart-wrenching reminder of how easily suspicion can blind us, and how love can manifest in the most unexpected ways. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest betrayals we experience are the ones we inflict upon ourselves by refusing to trust. Have you ever jumped to a conclusion about someone you love, only to find out the reality was completely different? How do you think you would have reacted in Eleanor's shoes? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This story shows that love, trust, and communication are the true treasures in any relationship. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of profound love and surprising twists. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.